videos before. It's nice to meet you in cyberspace. So, I'm a Christian preacher, and I've discussed in times past, matters that would be considered by most conservative in my approach to them. And these matters would be like, abortion, they'd be, matters of same-sex relationship and marriage as it pertains to how Christianity views it. And it would be, generally speaking, it would be when I'm asked about the subject of same-sex relationships, or the modern term homosexuality or bisexuality or whatever it is. So I would answer according to the Bible, which of course isn't unlawful in any way. But there would be people who would prefer not to hear it, and they would voice their opinion, and wrongly they would call An Garda Síochána. So we know that An Garda Síochána, they're not an agony aunt, they have nothing to do with civil matters, and they have to uphold our rights. So if they find that you're not behaving criminally, they have to uphold your rights and freedoms. So I've been through the courts. I've been imprisoned for a month on the basis of a civil order that was deemed by the High Courts as unlawfully implemented. So in other words, the civil order never existed, because if it wasn't lawfully arrived at, it cannot be lawfully enforced. We have a big issue at the moment. It's a big issue. There is treason being committed in Ireland. Now, it's so intrinsic to human rights and equality and human rights internationally. So, like, for example, the Bill of the International Bill of Human Rights. That's, covers this. So Ireland are not only offending in Ireland now, they're offending internationally. Because what the court has said is this outlandish thing that something, until it has been deemed unconstitutional by a court, is presumptively constitutional. This is absolutely and profoundly wrong. When a civil order is granted and implemented, the warning on that civil order, your guideline, your warning, it says, and this is on every civil order, warning, you must comply with said civil order unless you have a reasonable excuse not to. Now, as citizens, you're expected to know your rights and your responsibilities. How am I supposed to engage my rights if there's an apprehension that I might be impeded as a result of a presumptively constitutional legislation? I'm trying to go and speak in public. It's been before the High Court. They said, you've done nothing wrong in speaking in public. The civil order shouldn't have been given. It's quashed. That's what the High Court said. Then it went before the Court of Appeal, who want their cake and eat it. They said, we're dismissing the appeal. Well, if they're dismissing the appeal, they've nothing more to say on it. But they did say something on it and incriminated themselves. And I'll show you. I'm going to read from it here. It's been posted to me. I received it this morning. And this is very, very serious stuff. And wait till I give you a laugh. I mean, if it wasn't so serious, it might be funny, but... I'm just looking for the specific ruling. Excuse me, please bear with me. So that might be elsewhere. Because I have two forms here. So here's the other. I thought it was just a copy of it. Maybe it is. I'm just struggling to locate. But irrespective of this final judgment, I assure you, I have what the court has said on the matter, where they said we must assume that something is presumptively constitutional until it in other words, oh yes, sorry, it is ordered that the appeal be dismissed. So what happened was the court ruled that that all the convictions that came should be quashed, and what they failed to actually do was test the constitutionality of the sections through which the civil order was first given. And the court actually said it remains an open question as to whether those sections are constitutional. So now we have months have passed, even years, since the court first begun to test the constitutionality of sections 113, 115 and 117, which would require the testing of 113 and 114. You couldn't test 115 and 117 without testing 113 and 114 of the same act, because 113 and 114 give motion to, definition to, mechanism to 115 and 117. It'd be like trying to understand a word without its dictionary definition. You couldn't really thoroughly. So to test 115 and 117 without 113 and 114 would be inept and wouldn't be satisfactory. So effectively what they've done is they've said, we the court, High Court of Ireland, have seen that this section should be tested because there's a questionable, there's enough of a question as to whether it's constitutional or not. What's more is the High Court concluded that it remains an open question as to whether those sections are constitutional or not. Now we have the Court of Appeal saying we must assume or presume they're constitutional until they're shown not to be. What? So you're saying two courts of Ireland, the two of the highest courts of Ireland, are saying there's a question as to whether these sections are constitutional, but let's make rulings on them anyway? And let's say that everybody must comply with these sections, even to their own harm, and even if it is found later on that they were harmed, because we must presume that these are constitutional, no error was made on the part of the state. Sorry guys, not a chance. Listen, can you imagine somebody saying to you, you're not allowed to walk down the street? Now, civil order, you're not allowed to walk down the street. But it's my right to walk down the street. Yeah, but unless you've a reasonable excuse not to obey it, you must not walk down the street. What? But you know, as an Irish citizen, that's not a lawful request or order. So if you now start complying with things that are not lawful requests or orders, you're now contributing to treason. You're now contributing to unlawful behaviour in the organs of state. You're aiding and abetting it, actually, because not only is it you not walking down the street, but it's others who around you who you're now educating incorrectly by obeying something that is unlawful and unconstitutional. So how can I be expected to know the law, carry out my day knowing my rights and fully exploring them, if I have these trepidations and apprehensions that because a court told me I don't have them, even though I know I do, that I must behave as though I don't have them? What sort of tyranny is this? What sort of tyranny is that? What sort of treason is that? So, the point I'm making to you is this, very simple. We have the Court of Ireland now saying that we must assume something that is presumptively constitutional, even if we know as Irish citizens it's directly coming against our rights in an unlawful way. Not only that, but they've been exposed in conspiracy to offend the rights of the Irish person, because now they're claiming something that has been questioned in its constitutionality must be considered presumptively constitutional until it has been shown by a court that it's not. Who wrote the Constitution? A court? It's the job of the court to uphold your rights, primarily. That's number one. Vindicate the rights of the person, and if they've been harmed, recompense them. In other words, compensate them. How can you quantify the harm that a person has gone through and facilitate its reimbursement if you're telling them that they must assume that the wrong that was done to them was right, even though you've just said it was wrong? So the court is saying, we know that what happened to you is wrong, Mr. Tallon, but we're not going to even motion towards compensating you. We haven't even talked about it. You mean my being in prison for 1 month was wrong? Yeah, because the civil order was wrong in the first place. So there was no actual lawful incumbency upon you to obey it. What they're saying is there was a lawful incumbency upon you to obey it because it hadn't at that time been proven wrong. Now they're offending the rights of the Irish person. They're actually coming against the written law. This is the Court of Appeal in Dublin. They're coming against the written laws of Ireland, because it says you must obey the said civil order unless you have a reasonable excuse not to. Are the Court of Ireland saying that it's not a reasonable excuse not to obey a civil order when the civil order is unlawfully given? And you have knowledge of that? Are they saying obey? Sure, all you'd have to do in that case is write up a civil order that you know is unlawful. Then that person must presume that they should obey that for as long as it takes the court to do anything about it. Sure, all they'd have to do is keep kicking it down the road, and that's exactly what they did. I was under threat and duress of arrest for over 2 years on the basis of a civil order that has no lawful grounding or foundation. And the High Court are claiming that we must presume that the section that brought that into effect is constitutional until a court says it's not. Well, why haven't the court said it's not? Why are they protecting a section of the legislature that is questioned? And why are they failing to conclude on its testing when it was brought to them? It was on their table and they commenced the test. They scheduled it in the court and then they failed to carry out the test, giving no reason as to why. Do you know how rotten that is? That you have the district court, the High Court, and now the Court of Appeal conspiring together to enforce something that is basically unlawful and has been shown by the High Court as being such. Now, we know that the sections that brought this civil order into effect were brought before the High Court, and they started testing them and abandoned the test, giving no reason as to why. Later, the Court of Appeal became aware of such a test being commenced and not completed. Then they say the case is dismissed, but we're going to have a say on this anyway, and we're going to say you must assume that it's constitutional unless it's been shown that it isn't. Hold on a minute. You must assume that it's constitutional unless it's been shown that it isn't? Do you know that the fruits of a rotten tree are rotten? And rotten fruit only comes from a rotten tree? You can't have good fruit from a rotten tree. So something that comes to remove your rights is a rotten tree. So the court pretending that that's not the case, that something bad can come out of something good, is a court that's denying the truth and common sense and logic. They're actually denying the law. because the fruits of a constitutional act must be found constitutional. If the fruits of the act are found unconstitutional, the act is unconstitutional. They know this. But they're saying, yeah, we found that the fruits are rotten, but we must assume the tree is good still. What kind of madhouse is that? Oh yeah, I took an apple off the tree and it was completely rotten, and so, but the tree's good. The tree, how could it possibly be good? I will assume the tree is good even though it's producing rotten fruit. We must presume it is. So what they're saying is, don't mind your constitution. The court has the last say. Well, if I'm told that I have a right to speak in public, and somebody comes along and tells me I don't have a right to speak in public, stop talking, and they point the shotty at me, what am I to do? I mean, if somebody points a shotty at you, you do whatever they tell you, right? You go with the man with the gun. But the point is that unless there's an escape, I mean, if it's go with him or die. So the point is that you certainly have to know your rights in order to avail of them. So if you don't know, if you know your rights are you're allowed to speak in public, and somebody else, no matter who they are, whether it's a man with a shotgun or the guard, both of them are trying to take away your rights. And so whether they're using a shotgun to scare you or unlawful legislation to scare you, they're both terrorists. Come to take away your rights by instilling fear in you, trepidation, apprehension of harm. And imprisonment is harm. It's measurable, quantifiable harm. Now, they're alluding to, they haven't said it, but they're alluding to, and their actions show this, that I spent a month in prison as a result of not obeying something I wasn't expected to obey because it came against my rights and freedoms. The law tells me I'm not expected to obey it if it comes against my rights and freedoms. Listen now, I'm going to quote the law. You must obey this said civil order unless you have a reasonable excuse not to. Are the courts now saying that you having a lawful right to do something is not a reasonable excuse not to do it? In other words, to not have that right taken away. What sort of madhouse is that? That's not logical thinking. That's mad. If I'm not expected to obey a civil order, if I have a reasonable excuse not to, are they saying that the order being unlawful is not a reasonable excuse not to obey it? That would be mental. I mean, that would be mad. But that's effectively what the Court of Appeal have said. But why are they talking on this matter if they're dismissing the appeal? Why are they having their say? They're only incriminating themselves. And they have done. They've basically conspired with the High Court to be aware that there's a section that is questionable for its constitutionality, and they're not doing anything about it. None of them. The High Court are worse in it because they actually started testing it and then abandoned it. Guys, this is so treasonous. It's ridiculous. The whole thing is absolute conspiratorial treason. And it comes against your human rights, your Irish rights. It comes against so many different aspects of human life and law that I don't know how anybody thinks it's going to benefit anybody. They should be tearing it out immediately. Do you know that the sections that were before the High Court to be tested have been shown unconstitutional? Because the High Court recently ruled on another matter where it said guards cannot prosecute in court. Well, the sections that I'm talking about and the sections that led to my civil order, somebody trying to ban me from speaking, which it was found later on was totally unlawful, are inciting people, members of An Garda Síochána, to attempt to prosecute in court. So these sections are telling guards, prosecute in court, represent other guards' evidence, when the High Court says you can do neither activity. So now the High Court is saying you can't, guards, prosecute in court, you can't represent each other's evidence, but they know that the sections that I brought before the High Court tell guards to do both of those activities. They know they're unlawful. They're not presumptively constitutional. They're absolutely outrageously unlawful. Outrageously. But they're telling me that you should have presumed that they were constitutional. Wrong. That goes against the law. It says, and they're not only telling me, they're saying that every Irish person should presume that something's constitutional until the court tells them it's not. Wrong. It's the Irish people that give the court their authority. It's the Irish people that wrote the Constitution. So Irish people know their Constitution and should. So who's the court to tell us that we don't have rights until they reaffirm that we do? What kind of juggling act is that? That's a madhouse. You have the rights after we tell you you have them. No, the Constitution tells me I have them. So if something comes against my rights, constitutional rights, it is obviously unconstitutional. It doesn't require a barrister at law to tell me otherwise. The layman is satisfactorily intelligent and versed to know that if I'm allowed to speak, somebody telling me not to is unlawful. So guys, this is ridiculous. And now it's at the highest levels of the courts, and they can't sustain it any longer. They're now committing conspiratorial treason, and they want to back down very, very quickly. In Jesus' mighty name. Praise the Lord Jesus. Amen.